Hey, Shalom Markins with Karma Kapash from GMS London, giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Chakwadash. Want to give double honors unto the elders, the apostles of GMS, and Shalom out there to the hopeful elect, preaching the truth in all sincerity. Back again with another video. I'm going to entitle this one, Where Y'all Fringes At? Alright, and then this was inspired by the older brother of Kwayu Kwam. He posted, he did a voice note in the chat, and he said, he bumped into somebody today, I believe, right? And they kind of recognized him, and recognized him as being an Israelite. And he told him, man, he asked him where his fringes was at, and then it's just funny, man, because a lot of guys, that quote unquote believe, call themselves being an Israelite and being in this truth, man, that they focus on, you know, not to be demeaning, but smaller things in the scriptures rather than focusing on the Lord, Yahweh Shai. A lot of guys, they want to talk about the law, keeping the law 100%, which is an impossible thing to do. And so, they'd rather, be on things like that than having the name the Lord, for instance, or understanding Yahweh Shai's role in our salvation. Um, you know, they'd rather focus on the smaller issues that really don't hold so much weight in this ministry, right? And that's not to say, we don't have to wear fringes and that. We do wear fringes. We just don't wear it in, when we go to work, for instance. And you got camps out there that want to do this and that. And if you want to do that, go ahead. That's fine. Just be understand and be aware. People are watching you, right? And people, you know, we're not in our kingdom. Okay, we're in our enemies' lands, right? They are looking for us. They are looking for reasons and excuses to, f with us. And when that time of trouble comes, they know exactly who they're looking for. And so it as I'm gonna read later, all things are lawful, but not necessarily expedient, right? And we have to use, levels of wisdom in our enemies' lands, right? We know we on these lists like Project Megiddo, all these different lists that they got upon, got for us, man. Because it's why they call us Black Hebrew Israelites, even though we're not Black Hebrew Israelites, but they got us on the Southern Poverty Law, thing, in regards to extremism and terrorism and all these types of things. Even though we're not be doing anything, they're put on high alert concerning us because we speak against this kingdom, right? So it doesn't, it's not the smartest thing to do necessarily, right? To make yourselves targets and bring upon yourself unnecessary persecution, right? But like I said, we go out there, we teach. When we out there teaching in the name of Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shai, we wear our fringes, because that's, hey, can't hide it, right? We're out here to teach, right? So we're gonna put it on display, all right. But when it comes to, like, the everyday things, it's not a requirement, even though it is a commandment, right? We have to be move, as we like to say, incognito. All right, and so I want to go through some presets and some information. I was talking to Chat GPT, and getting its take on it, on in history, whatever. But let's start here at the beginning, right? Concerning the fringes, right? So we know it's a commandment. Here you find it here in Numbers 15, verse 38. Right, so speak unto the children of Israel and bid them that they make them fringes in their borders of their garments throughout their generations, that they put on the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue. Right, and it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them. Right, so these fringes exist, right, purely to remind us of the law, right? And so they do very little if you wear fringes and not keeping the law, right? So consider this as an example, right? Because obviously, you know, the guy that said that to the older brother, you know, I don't know if he was wearing fringes on at that particular moment. I don't know, but you know, just for like a rebuttal, you know, you know, you could ask me where my fringes are, and I'll be like, well, did you slay anybody from the Starburst gang? You know, according to the law today, because there's enough around. You know, you're sure to bump into one of them you know, at some point today. You know, did you put them did you put them in the grave like the scriptures say, or did you allow it? I guarantee you, if they met, if they saw, they met, they bumped into, you know, the Starburst gang. You know what I'm talking about, Alphabet Crew, right? They didn't do nothing to them. Know why? Because they ain't fucking stupid, right? But you're not keeping the commandments either, right? So we could all, you know, what's the one I'm looking for, man? Posture, you know, about, oh, I'm keeping these laws and you ain't keeping those laws and da 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 da. And this is why ultimately we're under this grace that Yahweh Shai have bought for us through the shedding of his own blood, right? Because this law is not having an effect over us to the point where, you know, if you don't do certain things that you're going to be put to death, right? And just by the way, there's no actual punishment for not wearing fringes, right? In the law, okay? Which we're gonna, you know, I'll show you that in a minute. All right, so you're really just being over righteous. All right, and so I might as well grab this since I'm speaking on it, right? This is Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 16. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Because we know what the scriptures say, but we also know we're in the land of our captivity, and we know we can't keep everything the way we want to, right? It's just not possible. We can't keep the law 100%, and this is why we won't harp on about keeping the law 100%. All we merely say to you is keep the law to the best of your abilities, man, within reason and with wisdom, right? This is what we tell you basically, right? You man can be overzealous, and like I said, you could, if you want to wear fringes to work, go ahead, right? But don't come and complain, or don't complain that you're being persecuted because you know you're out there teaching on the Saturday or whenever, right? And you know, people when you get to work now, they identify you because you wearing those fringes. You must be one of those black Hebrew Israelites. You must be, you know, we must believe this and believe that. You're hate, you know, you're this, and you know, don't be surprised, innit? Because that's just naturally gonna come, right? And so it's just better to be wise in those instances, in those environments, right? And again, it's something that happened when, you know, the Israelites were being persecuted in Rome. Okay, they were hiding their identities. All right, which I'm going to get into in a minute, right? But it says, be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself? Why put yourself in that kind of predicament when you don't need to? You know, knowing that the Lord has got you, the Lord understands, right? And like I said, that's not a natural thing whereby there is a punishment for not wearing fringes. It's purely there to remind you. It's a commandment given to you to remind you to keep the laws. All right, but all we can do right now is keep them to the best of our abilities. All right, because like I said, there ain't nobody, you know, you ain't gonna be going out there fulfilling all the law, man. Because fulfilling all the law, you know, you're gonna put you end up in jail. All right, just put it like that. All right, be not overmuch wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time? Right, so we fall short, right? Our righteousness is as filthy rags, and we fall short, right? But just because we know we have this grace, don't be acting out. You know, don't be acting out and, you know, doing what you feel like according to the flesh. That's not what you're supposed to be doing with the grace, right? It's meant to cover the shortcomings, man. All right, but yeah, you're being over righteous, especially when you're being, you know, judgmental on other brothers that they ain't doing what you're doing. You know, Um, this is Romans chapter 10, verse 3. So for they being ignorant of God's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness, having not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God. Right? For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness is to everyone that believeth. Right? So like I said, we're being covered by the blood of Yahweh Shai, right? But there's still people out there that believe that all they got to do is keep the law and everything will be cool. IAYC is one of these camps, that push keep the law 100%, which they can't do. They are not doing, right? But by this action, they're going to be delivered. It's not true. Okay, we've been delivered through Yahweh Shai, and Yahweh Shai is having mercy on his elect because they're not perfect, right? They're not able to keep the law perfectly. Okay. This is Philippians chapter 3. Verse 8, right? It says, yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Yahweh Shai, Mahashiach, my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Yahweh Shai. Right? Paul was a keeper of the law. He understood the law. He understood the scriptures, all of that, right? Right? But all that really didn't mean anything unless he didn't believe in Yahweh and Yahweh Shai and the mercy that he was bringing him, right? Verse 9, and be found in him, not having my own righteousness, right, which is of the law, because I kept the law. That's what he's saying. These guys are saying the same thing, because I keep the law. We keep the law. You don't keep the law. You don't keep the law 100%. Okay? Your own righteousness is such things, right, which is really, it's really a carnal perspective. Even though the law is spiritual, it's a kind of carnal perspective because it's about you and what you are able to do, rather than what the Lord was able to do and what he is able to do, which is to deliver you from sin. You can't deliver yourself from sin. We're already tainted, right? And like I said, every day goes by. We're not perfect, man. We don't do things perfect, right? So it's not about what you do or what you're capable of doing. It's all about Yahweh Shai, right? It says, be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Yahweh Shai, the righteousness which is of God by faith. All right, so that's what it's really ultimately about. All right. Let's see here. Let me read this quick. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not, right? You're not proving anything by wearing fringes to work or on your daily commute or whatever the case may be. If you want to be seen, you want to see the men, and like he's righteous. It's the same. It's effectively the same way the scribes and Pharisees broaden their garments, broaden their phylacteries, right, to be seen. Oh, he's more pious than everybody. Look at how long these fringes are. You just wearing them out in the open is to show everybody, look how I'm a staunch Hebrew. When you're really missing the key things of this ministry. You're missing the key things. You're about the aesthetic and the idea of being this, these top Hebrews or whatever. Right? You guys like that aesthetic. Right? But you're missing, the key aspects of this faith. So say you rock out around these dudes and you ain't got fringes. The first thing they want to talk about is where your fringes. Okay, but these men ain't, they don't praise Yahweh Hashem Shai. They don't do none of these observances. Keeping Sabbath and on a Friday and a Saturday, all these different types of things. I teach that John the Baptist for that truth, or the MOTB. It's not the microchip, and all these different things, right? That make these camps unfinished, for lack of a better word, right? But you're more concerned about whether the brother's got his fringes or not, when it's not even a deep thing like that, right? There's certainly more important and more pressing things that is happening or that you should know at this moment in time, right? Not all things edify, right? Like I said, the fringes are there for us to remind us to keep the law, All right. But the way you guys act is that you keep the law 100% and you don't. You know. So again, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient, not convenient to do. All right. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. Okay. It's not expedient to go into work and them them to connect the dots. Oh, you're Hebrew Israelite. Oh, you hate this and you hate that. Oh, but we've got colleagues and this and that. You know how it's gonna play out. For these companies and that are real uptight about upholding these new age doctrines. The Starburst crew and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? You're gonna find yourself in hot water for no reason. It was a very unnecessary thing. It wasn't wise, right? Which is next one, right? Matthew 10 verse 16. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Okay, we're amongst wolves. You have to tread carefully among wolves. Don't be careless, right? Because these wolves will eat you up, right? It says, be ye therefore wise as serpents. We have to be smart about it, man. And I say we're not doing it for just to prove something to somebody. Oh, I'm a tough Hebrew, or I'm fearless, and all this. No, you got to be use discernment, man. Be spiritual. Wearing fringes is not going to get you on a chariot just because you wore fringes to work or wherever. That's not going to get you on a chariot, man. Right? Your faith is what's going to get you on the chariot. What do you believe? Do you have this doctrine? Do you have 100% truth? That's what's going to get you on a chariot. Not your fringes. And saying a lot of you guys are wearing them and not keeping the law anyway. So they're definitely going to save you. Okay? It says, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Right? You move incognito. Right? You're not trying to bring too much attention to yourself, man. Teaching is a different thing because, we're going to bring all the attention to ourselves preaching this word, right? But when we're not doing that, there's no need. There's no need, It's Hebrews chapter 7 verse 19. For the law made nothing perfect, right? The law didn't make nobody perfect. Yahushua kept the law, but he was perfect. He was perfect because he didn't transgress, but we all transgressed. So the law made nothing perfect. It didn't keep us out of captivity, did it? Right? Because we never able to keep it. Right? For the law made nothing perfect, but the bringing in of a better hope did. Yahushua is that better hope, by which we draw nigh unto the Most High. Right? So you can go on about all the law and wearing your fringes and that, but ultimately this is not ultimately what's going to deliver you, right? So like I said, there's more important things that you need to be focusing on as opposed to whether a brother's wearing his fringes when he's not teaching. Is Galatians chapter 3 verse 22, right? So, but the scripture have concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith of Yahushua might be given to them that believe. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up unto faith, which should afterwards be revealed. Right? Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Yahushua, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster, for ye are all children of God by faith in Yahushua. All right? Again, and while we're in captivity, all we can do is rehearse the righteous acts. Right? It's Judges 5 and verse 11. So they that are delivered from the noise of archers in the places of drawing water, in our captivities, right? There shall they rehearse the righteous acts of the Lord. So we're going to keep the Lord to the best of our abilities, man. Okay? Even the righteous acts toward the inhabitants of his villages in Israel, then shall the people of the Lord go down the gates. All right? So the best we could do is rehearse right now, because you don't get things perfect. Okay? But you work towards it, right? And like I said, you use wisdom, and knowledge to navigate this world, right? Use that discernment, all right? Just like the Jews did, or the disciples did, the Israelites did, when in Rome, when they were being persecuted, right? So I'll chat GPT a few questions, right? Starting off with, did the Jews, or Israelites, conceal their identity in the Roman era? It says, yes, in certain periods during the Roman era, some Jews did conceal their identity, especially during times of persecution, social pressure, or legal restriction. However, this varied greatly depending on the time, place, and local Roman policy. Right, and so you got examples of times where it took place, where it happened, right? After the First Jewish-Roman War ended in 73 CE, Common Era, right? With the destruction of the Second Temple, and especially after the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? The Roman Empire imposed harsh restrictions on Jewish practices. Emperor Hadrian banned circumcision and Jewish religious rituals in Judea. Jews were expelled from Jerusalem, which was renamed Aelia Capitolina, and access was restricted. In this context, some Jews may have concealed their identity to avoid persecution or penalties. All right. See, in places, diaspora Jews, in places like Alexandria, Rome, and Asia Minor, Jews often lived relatively freely and were allowed to practice their religion. However, during certain emperors' reigns, like under Tiberius and Domitian, Jews faced discrimination or even expulsion. In these moments, some may have downplayed or hidden their Jewish identity, especially in public or official context, right? So they just kept it hidden from them, right? And some Israelites would go further than others, but in case of the fringes, it was just a simple thing, right? You didn't wear your fringes out outside, or didn't put them on, right? And like I said, there's no actual penalty for that. There's no punishment that's commanded in the scriptures that if you don't wear your fringes, you're excommunicated or you're put to death or anything like that. It just doesn't exist. All right. Jewish tax, right? After 70 CE, Rome imposed the Fiscus Judaicus, a tax on Jews throughout the empire. To avoid this tax, some people concealed their Jewish identity, especially converts or those with ambiguous status, right? Conversion to Christianity, right? By the 4th century, as Christianity became dominant in Roman Empire, Jews were increasingly marginalized. Those that stuck to the old teachings per se, that didn't follow Yahweh Shai, because all the Israelites that followed Yahweh Shai were being called Christians, right? So until obviously it was taken over by pagans when the Lord died out, right? Some Jews converted to Christianity genuinely or for social legal reasons, and may have hidden or downplayed their Jewish origins. Summary. Yes, some Jews did conceal their identity during the Roman era, but it was usually in response to persecution, taxation, or social pressure. Right? And like I said, we uphold certain values that this world does not. Right? And so there would become social pressure if we was openly, Hebrew Israelite at a workplace or, in certain environments and that, and then what, bro could lose a job. But over what? Doesn't make sense. Okay. So I typed in after that, how did they hide their identity, right? Because I wanted to get into the Fringes situation, right? So, it goes into a few things. It didn't answer my question directly, so I had to ask another question afterwards. But one thing that did come up, which, elders and brothers have gone into before, right? So avoidance of distinctive practices is one way they would hide their identity, right? Jewish identity in antiquity was closely tied to ritual and lifestyle. Some Jews avoided these outward signs, not practicing circumcision or hiding it. Circumcision was a major marker of Jewish identity. In Greek and Roman culture, public nudity, example gymnasiums and bars, made circumcision visible. All right. Some Jews avoided circumcision for their children. Okay. And again, there are, we know in the scriptures there are punishments for these types of things. Not circumcising your children, right? And yourselves, right? So some avoided circumcision for their children. Some underwent epispasm, right? And this sounds like a crazy thing, but it actually happened, right? They were going that far with it, right? To try to, assimilate and hide themselves among these heathens, right? So underwent epispasm, okay? A painful surgical reversal to restore the foreskin, which is crazy, right? But they were doing that, okay? Now, we ain't worried about doing crazy shit like that. You know what I mean? I think it's very simple, man. Just don't take your fringes, don't put fringes on your garments to work. You know what I mean? Man, I got uniform. Just wear the uniform, innit? Or whatever. You know? These no, we ain't gonna do some craziness like this. You know? Things like dietary law concealment. Jews avoided pork and had strict kosher practices to blend in. Some ate non-kosher food, so some ate pork in front of others to prove that they're not Jews or whatever the case may be. Again, there are punishments concerning these things, so we wouldn't be doing these things, and plus that's not something that is gonna land you in anything if you didn't eat pork. People might think you're a bit like weird or, oh, you Muslim, you get all that fucking stupid shit, man, and you ain't got to tell them shit. You ain't gonna tell them fuck all. You know what I mean? You can say, well, yeah, dietary, health, whatever. You can do whatever. I just don't eat that. Don't like it. And most people are cool in it. It's like, oh, how you like your steak? Oh, well done. What you like? You can't have a steak well done. It's gonna be rare. Like, people might just think like, oh, but you can just say like, well, that's not how I like my shit. I don't like my steak like that. And no one's none the wiser. They can just say, oh, it must be a Hebrew Israelite. It's not gonna happen. So those things, we ain't really gonna be concerned about. But obviously, if you take your fringes to work, there's only one group of people on the planet that wear fringes really like that, and that's us. Oh, you're that hate group. You don't like them people. You don't like the leprous kind. It's just a whole lot of headache that you just don't be needing. All right. Sabbath observance suppression. The Sabbath was a very visible sign of Jewish identity. Concealing it meant working on the Sabbath or pretending not to rest. Right. So yeah, for us it's a bit difficult because our work is it's kind of set out, I guess, for like a better word. Right. It's hard to get the time off work for Sabbaths and stuff like that because your rota for the week or your roster, however you call it. So sometimes you have to work. For us to try and get like every Sabbath off, man, that would be, you know what I mean? That'd be difficult, and they wouldn't be able to accommodate that. So sometimes we're gonna go in. But again, this is why this we're in captivity, man, and this is why the grace exists, man. Okay, the things that we fall short in, Yahushua is covering. He's covering his elect. Right, those that he have given his truth to. All right. So yeah, I wanted to bring it down. I thought, that was interesting, right? Because we speak about it, and it does sound like a crazy thing, that epispasm thing, but it was something that was going on. It's bad enough, man. When we came in this troop, man, I was a younger man, I guess, early 20s, and I had to get circumcised then as a man. It's like, it wasn't very comfortable to go do. You know what I mean? A grown ass man, put his trousers down, have fucking doctors, you cut off your foreskin and shit. Okay, but we did it, because we believed, man. Let's see here. So yeah, let's read the summary here. The Jews concealed their identity in the Roman era through abandonment or hiding of religious practices, adoption of Greco-Roman names. Well, we were raised up in this world, so we had those names anyway. All right. Names and customs, participation in local culture, and sometimes migration or conversion. These acts were usually driven by fear of persecution, legal penalties, or desire for social mobility. The extent of concealment varied widely by place, time, and personal conviction. All right. So yeah, I guess it depends on where you are. You know what your workplace is like, what you can get away with. These types of things. I guess that it all does depend, right? All right. So because he didn't address the fringes thing, I typed in afterwards. What about the fringes on their clothes? All right. It says, great question. Right. ChatGPT jokes. The fringes or tzitzit, right, were indeed a visible and distinctive element of Jewish identity. Okay, in antiquity, they are commanded in the Torah. Okay, as we read earlier, right, Numbers 15. Okay, where Jews are instructed to wear fringes on the corners of their garments as a reminder of the commandments. Right, in the Roman era, tzitzit could mark someone clearly as Jewish, right, or in our case as Hebrew Israelites, or in the world's case, Black Hebrew Israelites, because we're scary. Supposedly we're all black, right? But no, we're not all black. That's a lie, right? But yeah, the world marks us as some extreme crazy ass group that's, according to vocab, the most dangerous thing on the planet. So, people, as soon as they understand or think that about you, it's gonna cause problems and issues, right? Um, yes, especially in cities where Jews were a minority, which everywhere we are a minority. So yes, some Jews lightly concealed or removed their fringes during times of danger, persecution, or social pressure. Um, Here's how the tzitzit factored into identity concealment. Wearing cloaks without fringes. All right, Jews who wanted to hide their identity might simply wear Roman or Hellenistic style cloaks that didn't have the four corners required for a tzitzit. Or they might intentionally remove or not attach the fringes despite their religious obligation. Hiding the fringes inside the garment. Some may have tucked the tzitzit inside or worn garments under outer robes to keep them invisible. All right, so yeah, maybe you got fringes on your boxer shorts. I do wonder if that's like the natural thing with some of you groups out there, but you never know in it, right? But yeah, you have an undergarment, I guess, with fringes underneath, I guess, right? But typically we wear fringes on our garments, our long garments, So and even that t-shirt wearing garment stuff with the fringes and that's not, that's not like a bit of cultural, I guess, biblical, whatever, right? They're meant to be on our outer garments, on our robes, right? That's where because they're meant to be reminded of them, right? They're meant to be, they're meant to be there, right? When you're on your outer garments, right? So they'll be on our robes, our long garments. So yeah, some may have tucked the tzitzit inside of worn garments under the outer robes to keep them invisible, much like crypto Jews. Crypto means hidden, right? Did in later periods such as the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah, because them motherfuckers were going for us, man. All right. Wearing modified tzitzit, some may have used subtler or shorter fringes that wouldn't be as obvious, especially in public settings. Cultural pressures. In Greek and Roman society, uniformity of dress in public was a sign of cultural assimilation and belonging. Distinctive Jewish garments or fringes could be seen as alien, arrogant, or subversive. Right, Roman suspicion of foreign cults, especially after the Jewish revolts, many public displays of Jewish piety. So like, you read this again. Especially after the Jewish revolts, made public displays of Jewish piety dangerous at times. Right, and this is kind of where we're sitting right now, because our act of defiance against the nations that we're in, okay, causes these nations to have their backs up against us. All right, and it's not like brothers haven't suffered and been killed, right, and been threatened because of our teaching. All right, so it's true even now. Okay, maybe not as bad as moments back then, but it's still true. They don't like us, man. Right, and they can't wait to really get their hands on us. Right, this is reflected in rabbinic texts and historical accounts that suggest a tension between religious observance and public safety. Did all Jews conceal their tzitzit? Not all. Many Jews, especially in Jewish majority areas like Judah of Galilee, likely wore tzitzit openly, right, when they're all amongst each other. as a majority. Okay. In the diaspora, whether they concealed or displayed them would depend on local Roman policy, tolerant versus hostile governors, level of assimilation in the community, risk of persecution under Hadrian or Domitian, personal conviction. Later parallels. It's worth noting that during the medieval and early modern persecution, Jews often concealed the tzitzit in similar ways, so the practice of hiding them for safety has precedent and continuity. All right. Yes, tzitzit was sometimes hidden, removed, or modified by Jews in the Roman era to avoid drawing attention or persecution. While they were a key mark of Jewish identity and religious observance, they visibly made them a risk in hostile environments, prompting some to conceal them as a sign of self-protection. All right, so I put in the disciples of Yahushua. I had to put in Jesus, right? Did they do this, right? Doesn't really answer it that well, I'll be honest with you. It goes into the fact that the Lord Yahushua wore them, right? It gives us a couple of scriptures there to show that. So he had them, right? But in the times that followed, in the persecution, that it doesn't really tell me anything too much about that, right? So it shows that the Lord had them, he wore them, and obviously the men of the Lord would have worn them with him. You know what I'm saying? But did they ever conceal their identity or tzitzit? There's no direct scriptural evidence, right? Because there is no scriptural evidence, right? So I was asking really from a more historical perspective, but it didn't give me that really. There's no direct scriptural evidence that the disciples intentionally concealed their Jewish identity, including tzitzit, during Jesus' lifetime or immediately after his death. But some later developments suggested a shift, right? So again, they're not taking that from the scripture, because the scripture doesn't actually speak about that, right? But historically, when they were being persecuted and they were hiding, obviously they would have. That's what the shift is speaking about. After Yahushua's death, after the crucifixion circa 30 to 33 CE, and especially after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, early Yahushua followers, many of whom were still Jewish or Israelites, right? Because they all were Israelites, faced a complex identity struggle. In Jewish communities, some Jewish authorities saw followers of Yahushua, eventually called Nazarenes, as heretical, right? That's from the bulk of the Israelites that were there in Judea, right? Tensions increased over time, especially after Gentiles began joining the movement, okay, Israelite foreigners, and didn't adopt Torah practices like tzitzit or circumcision, right? Because when people were coming in, they weren't commanded to keep the whole law, right? Because they were coming from different places and from different cultures per se, right? So I remember, let's see if I can find it. Offered to blood, right? They were always asked to keep certain commandments to begin with, right? Yeah, okay, this is it here. Because they were trying to make them circumcised and all this kind of business, right? But again, that comes when your faith builds up. You don't come in straight away and make you got guys that trying to take your foreskin off your and shit. That's that's a big jump, isn't it? Right. Let's see what. Right. Let me start. It's Acts 21 verse 18. And the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. Okay, again being the Israelite foreigners. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews which there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. And they are informed of thee, that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. So this is what ChatGPT is saying here, right? Basically, right? This moment in time, right? So what is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Do therefore this that we say to thee, we have 4 men which have a vow on them. And it says, take them and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things whereof thou wert informed concerning thee are nothing, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law. Because they were more concerned about them keeping the law more than anything else. They weren't concerned about, or they weren't thinking about the Yahweh Shai and the faith, the extension to the Israelite foreigners, man, the grace that he'd given them. They weren't thinking about this, right? Verse 25, as touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and have concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, right? To basically separate themselves from the old ways, right? Because where they were worshipping other gods and stuff like that, like these things are a must. You must separate yourself from these gods. You have to, right? So they were given key things to observe, right? And anything that came of it afterwards, as they grew in faith, then that was all gravy. That was good, right? But they had to stay away from these things, all right? So it says, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication. Right? So that's what they were commanded to do as they were coming into the faith. Right? That's like the minimum you must do. Right? The same thing. Like you come in the street, man, look, grow your beard, stop eating pork, stop worshipping other gods. These things are simple and easy to keep. Right? The circumcision thing, man, you might not do that straight away. Day one, you just go straight to the hospital or surgery or whatever and get it done. It doesn't happen day one. Right? Plus it costs money as well. This shit expensive. Right? So might not do that day one. That might be a year or whatever, however long it is. When you muster up the courage and and you got the funds. But at the very minimum, okay, you would grow your beard, don't eat pork, stop worshiping Jesus Christ if that's what you was into before, whatever. You just stop these things, man. They're easy enough, right? And just believe in the Lord and believe in the scriptures. Believe in the teachings, in the doctrine. So I think that's what I wanted from that. So back here, it says some Jewish believers in Yahweh Shai likely continue wearing tzitzit, but others may have started to downplay or stop outward Jewish practices to avoid social conflict, right? That's what it boils down to. Pardon me. So as Christianity spread among Gentiles, it gradually distinguished itself from Judaism, partly to avoid persecution aimed specifically at Jews. In this process, some Jewish believers in Jesus may have minimalized public Jewish markers like tzitzit or Sabbath observances. All right. So again, final thoughts. Yahweh Shai and his disciples did wear the fringes, right, as part of standard Jewish observance. Whether they hid them likely depended on time, place, and rising tensions, both with Roman authorities and within the Jewish community. Over time, as Christianity separated from Judaism, the practice of the fringes largely disappeared from the Christian tradition, right? Which that this situation here, where Christianity separates from Judaism, is a great area because it become largely paganized Christianity, right? We're realistically, originally, this was the Lord and his doctrine with the apostles and disciples, which had the truth, which was different from the observances of the Jews in Judea, right? So it all came a bit grey in that moment in time before they kind of went their separate ways, right? Both basically end up, Christianity became pagan, and quote unquote Judaism, was left back in, the old practices which weren't accurate, you know, because they never really adopted the doctrine of Yahweh Shai, you know. It's only the Israelites that you know, followed the Lord became the Christians, right, until Christianity was subverted. Anyway, and so after this, did I finish this? It says largely disappeared from Christian tradition except among Jewish Christians or Messianic Jews in later centuries. Is there any ramifications? This is what I typed afterwards, right? Is there any ramifications for not wearing fringes on clothes in the law of Moses? It says yes, but it's no. As it goes on to say, yes, according to the law of Moses, wearing the fringes is a commandment, which we know, right? And not wearing them would be considered a transgression, though it doesn't carry an explicit civil or ritual punishment like some of the other commandments. It doesn't have a punishment. Not in any form does it have a punishment, right? Because like I said, it's there purely to remind you to keep the law, or for us to keep the law. That's all it's there for. There isn't a punishment for not having them, right? Before, you know, people get on their high horses, right? And so then, you know, start, you know, cursing brothers out because man ain't got fringes. Well, what's the law behind that? What's, you know, am I going off? Am I wicked, or am I, you know, have I not got the truth because I'm not, you know, it doesn't mean these things. You know, back then you might say, oh, he doesn't keep the laws because he hasn't got any fringes on. But again, that's more of an outward appearance thing. It's not. He might keep the laws. You don't know. You know, but again, it's just there to remind us. All right. But like I said, you man ain't keeping the laws anyway, so you know we can't be hypocrites, right? Because that's what you're being. Okay, when you call out these small things. All right. There's no scripture on the punishment for not having your fringes on, right? Nature of the commandment. Here's a positive mitzvah. What that means, right? Commandment to do something rather than a prohibition. Right, and now it's going to talk about rabbinic law and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, that's their man thing. Consequence for not wearing the fringes. Torah does not prescribe a specific punishment for not wearing the fringes. However, not wearing them is still disobedience and direct command of the Most High, which is biblical and rabbinic thinking has spiritual consequences such as forgetting God's commandments. Right, so they believe if you don't have them, then you're gonna forget God's commandments. Right, but like I said, you got guys wearing fringes and not keeping the commandments. So what does it really mean? Right, it's all about Yahweh Shai and who he's dealing with, man, who his grace is upon. Okay, these guys are really faultless before the Lord, despite not being perfect. You know, risking divine disfavor punishment in a broader spiritual sense, right? That's these rabbis, right, saying these things, right? But like I said, you know, they say here what it's still disobedience to a direct command from God. Well, yeah, but then the same would apply when Yahweh Shai plucked the ears of corn on the Sabbath day, right? And he straight up told him, look, the men were hungered, right? And the Sabbath day was made for man, and the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, right? Same with these fringes. These fringes are made for us, right? To remind us, right? Don't the other way around, you know. And like I said, anything that we fall short upon, the Lord is, you know, covering his elect, okay, with his mercy, right? But to go on like, you know, it could be made or, you know, make or break whether you know wear fringes or not. That's just not the case. Right, so while there's no legal or corporal penalty for not wearing fringes in Mosaic law, failing to do so is considered a failure to obey God's command with spiritual and religious consequences, especially in traditional Jewish thought. Okay, again, that's their man things. Okay, but they don't even believe in Yahweh Shai, so who are they in it? that's the whole point. If you ain't with Yahweh Shai, what have you even got to say? You don't even believe in Yahweh Shai, you don't even believe in his doctrine. What have you really got to say? What authority are you? You know what I'm saying? If you're missing the whole point of Yahweh Shai and his sacrifice, then you bashing people over commandments that people are not keeping, you don't really get it. But yeah, that's it for the video, man. I hope this was edifying. Just made me chuckle today when the brother posted it in the chat. Because these guys are really just on. That's the main thing. Keep your fringe. Wear your fringes. Keep your fringes on. Wear your fringes. Where are they at? And they don't understand. The larger context of everything. The importance is on the law and on Yahweh Shai. But anyway, I'm going to end it there. Lord, this has been edifying. And I'll catch you brothers and sisters on the next video. Until next time, I say shalom.